Howdy, class. This month. 5-2, today's lesson, domain and range. I am on page 71 in your book. 71. Zoom it in. It's not clear there. That's okay. So, domain and range. Let's talk about it. We're going to write some notes in your book. We're going to write some on, I'm going to write on a sheet of paper. You could just use this side, my notes side over here. That works as well. But you may have heard domain and range, and we're going to start at basic, and we're going to go a little bit more in depth as we get into the year. But the important thing for domain is that, as it says in here, it's the set of all inputs. Usually, one way to look at it is domain is like your X values. Okay, so when we're looking at domain and range, I would say domain goes with the X values. They're not always X's, but that's why we say inputs. Okay. Now, the range, as it says in your book, is all the Y values, or your outputs. Okay, so whatever the Y values are, or the second in the ordered pair, the second column on the right, however you want to look at that, that's your domain for the X, range for the Y. So when we're looking at them, we're going to write them in what we call set notation. So they have writing math on the side. This is actually pretty good. So a function, we write it as like this squiggly bracket or parentheses, I call it. The ordered pair is 1, 2. Another one is 3, 4. Another one is 5, 6. So if I wanted to write the domain of this function, okay, and I know it's a function because there are no repeated X values, the domain is the X values, 1, 3, and 5. So notice I just list them there. The range is 2, 4, 6. So right now, we're just going to have a whole set of numbers listed. Eventually, we're going to learn how to write the domain is like all positive numbers, or the range is all negative numbers, or the range or domain is all real numbers. We're not going to do that just yet. That will come later on. So, for example, if I'm looking here, I'm still on page 71. It says, for each function below, identify the domain and range. Usually, we'll write it in numerical order. So you don't have to write it to match up. So what do I mean by that? The domain is the inputs, the X values. So I'm going to put it in order 3, 5, 7. The range, smallest is -2, then 1, then 6. Now, this doesn't mean 3 and 2 match up, 5 and 1, because they, or 7 and 6. In this case, they do, but that doesn't mean that would necessarily be the case. Let's look at the next one here. The domain is, we have 2, 6, and 8. The range, we only have -3 and 4. So this one's a good example because we do not write repeats. So I'm only going to put on there -3 and 4. I don't put a second value with it. I don't since there's 2 arrows to 4, I don't go -3, 4, 4. So here you don't know if 2 and -3 match up, 6 and 4, 8. Where does that one go? So it's okay if you don't have the same amount in the domain and range, or that they don't match up when you write them in order. Okay. For letter D, the domain and range here, I'm looking at first, here are my X values. So least is -7. I then have -6 and 9. Maybe you want to cross off. Helps me just to know I've used it. Range are my Y values. Smallest is -3. Next is 0. And then I have 2.5. So here's an example. 9 and 2.5 don't match up. That's okay. They're not meant to match up. They're just saying the domain, hey, here's what they are. The range, hey, here's what the range values are. Okay, so for what we're looking at here, they give you there's other stuff in the book that gives you way more than we really need to focus on. It's looking at, here you go. You want to do some practice? I'd pause on page 75, go to there, write down the domain for number 11, write down the range for 11, and then do the same for 12. So you came back from pausing. The domain, okay, I usually do something like this, D colon, and then the squigglies, it doesn't have to be perfect, is 2, 5, and 7. My range then is 2.3 and 15, because those are the outputs based on the mapping. Here, my domain, going least to greatest, I have negative 0.3, 1/6, and 1.5. The range, I have 3, 4, and 8. So that's all we're looking at. Sometimes it may ask you to plug in, like number 14. You can plug into that function. So you could go ahead and try that one. It's trying to show like it's a machine that churns it out. You have an input. X is inputted into x squared plus x plus 1. You get an output. So if I were to do, I'm just going to do this first one. It'd be like doing negative 1 squared plus negative 1 plus 1. Well, negative 1 squared becomes positive 1. Negative 1 here, plus 1. So I would have 1 minus 1 is 0, plus 1 is 1. So what's it saying? You put in negative 1, the output is 1. If you plugged in 0, it also would be 1. 0 squared is 0, plus 0 plus 1 is 1. And you could continue doing it. But sometimes you just put an input to get an output, then you can afterwards write your domain and range. So domains are any of your possible x values or inputs. Range, any of your possible y values or outputs. For right now, you're going to write it in those squiggly parentheses or brackets as set notation. Okay, have a great day.